In this video, I'm going to show you how to get an API key from OpenAI and start using their APIs. First of all, you need to head to platform.openai.com and you will land in a page like this. So you just need to fill in any details, and once you're signed up, you can log in. So once you log in, you will land in a page like this. If you like, you can go to the documentation and explore the different documentations for different models. You can also check the API reference if you like, or check some examples of use of the APIs, or visit the playground and choose the mode that you want to play with. Now, what we want to do is to get an API key. And to do that, you just need to click on your profile and then go to View API Keys. Here is a list of API keys that I generated in the past. To create a new secret key, you just need to press that button and then give the key a name. So for example, my test key, and then create the secret key. Now, it's very important to save this key somewhere safe and accessible, as once you close this message, you will not be able to see the secret key again. But don't worry too much, as you can create as many keys as you like if you lose this one. Okay. Now that you've got your secret key, you are ready to use the OpenAI APIs. And that's what you're going to do in the next video. In this video, you are going to build a completion example using the OpenAI completion API. The app is going to take as an input some text, and once you send the request to the server, you will get a completion using the OpenAI completion API. The result is shown in this green box. We also show the original prompt in the blue box, and at the bottom we show the object or the response that we received from the OpenAI completion API. To build the app, you're going to use React on the front end and Node.js on the back end. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code for all code written in this course, so I would strongly recommend that you use the same editor. If you don't have it already installed on your computer, you can just go to code.visualstudio.com and install it on your computer by pressing the download button. In order to start writing code and to make sure that we are all aligned, I would strongly recommend that you download the starting code zip file I attached to this lecture. Once you download the zip file, I would recommend you create a folder on your computer. I created a folder ChatGPT API course, and then once you unzip the zipped file, you can paste the content inside this folder. So this is what you're going to see. You're going to have a folder backend, which is empty, and then a folder front end with a React application inside it. The React application inside the front end folder is empty. So you could be tempted to create your own React application starting with an empty front end folder, but I would strongly recommend not doing that just to avoid any conflicts later on in the code. So when you download the source code, you will not see any Node modules folder in the containing folder, and you will not see one in the front end folder. So what you need to do is open the terminal for both the containing folder and the front end folder, and then run npm install in each folder. So npm install there and npm install there. So what these commands are going to do is install all the packages inside the package.json file in the back end and the package.json file in the front end. So once you do this, you will not need to install any packages later on in the course, as all packages used in the course are going to be installed on your computer, and that will save you a huge amount of time. Now, it's important to note that inside the package.json file on the front end, I set up a proxy right there to send all backend requests to port 5000. All right. So once you run npm install, you're going to have all the modules installed on your computer including the OpenAI module, and you will be ready to start writing code. All right, to start, I'm going to build a React component for our web page. So this web page shows the final project, which is on port 3001, but our application we're building right now is going to be on port 3000 on the front end. So let's go ahead and create this React component as well as its root, which is going to be the root directory of the localhost at port 3000. So I'm going to go to front end, then source, screens, and create a new file inside screens and call it home.js. So inside this file, I'm going to import React and use state to create some states for our components from React. Then I'm going to create a function and call it home and export it so that we can create a root for it. Now let's go to the app.js file and add a root for our home components. So I'm going to create a function app, and inside I'm going to return an empty element where I'm going to place a router. So I will need to import the router at the top. So I'm going to import browser router as router. And then I'm going to need also routes and routes from React router DOM. So inside the router, I'm going to have routes. And then inside the routes, I'm going to have the different routes for my components. So at the moment, I've got only one component. So I'm going to create one route for it. And this route is going to have a path. And since I want it in the root directory of the localhost, I'm going to set it to /. And the element is going to be our home React components. And as you can see, it's been imported automatically. Now let's export the app components. Export default app. And now let's start the front-end server using npm start. Now, if you go to localhost 3000, you will see an empty web page. Before adding any components to our web page, let's first add all the states we're going to need. So we're going to need a state for the input, which I'm going to call input value. We're going to need a state for the prompt, as we show the prompt in the prompt box. Also, we need a result state to show the result. And we're going to need an error state just in case something goes wrong and we want to show an error message. And finally, I need a state for this object, which I'm going to call JResult. And this object is displayed here using a stringified object. Okay, so let's go ahead and add all these states to our code. So these are the states we're going to need: the input value, error, results, prompt, and JResult. And I'm going to initialize all those states to an empty string. And here we've got each state and its corresponding setter function, which we're going to use later to set the value of the state. Okay. Now, when you press the submit button, you're going to send a request to the server, and we're going to create a handler for that event. So the handler is going to take care of the submission of the input. I'm going to add the handler right there. I'm going to call it HandleSubmit, and it's going to be an async function as we are sending a request to the server, and we need to wait for the request to be processed. So it's going to take as a parameter the event, which refers to the submission of the input to the server, and is going to run some code, which I'm going to write later. Now let's start building the HTML content. First, I'm going to wrap everything inside a container, as I'm using Bootstrap. So let's have a return statement, and inside our return, we're going to have a div of class container. And then inside this div, we're going to place all our content. First, I'm going to have a form made of this text area and the submit button. Then I'm going to have an error box, which will only show if we've got an error. Then I'm going to have a prompt box where we show our prompt, then a results box, then a JResults box where we show this JSON object. Let's start with the form and give it a class name, form horizontal, to give it some special Bootstrap styling. And then let's give it an onSubmit attribute, which I'm going to set to the HandleSubmit handler. So I'm going to keep the form empty for now and move to the other elements. So the next element is going to be the error. So I'm going to place this inside curly brackets, as I'm going to use the error as a condition. So error and. So this means that if error is set to true, we're going to show the elements that comes after and. And if error is set to false, or is close to false, then we're not going to show what comes after. So the error box is going to be a div, and the content of the div is going to be the content of the error state. And let's give this div an alert class and an alert danger class, and some margin top. And let's do the same thing with the prompt and the result. So we just need to change the state to prompt and results. Now I'm going to use alert secondary for the prompt and alert success for the results. And finally, we're going to show the J results. So let's copy this and amend it. So we're going to show the JSON objects if we've got a result. And instead of showing a div, I'm going to use a pre-HTML element, as we are passing a stringified object. And you'll need to place this inside parentheses, and inside this I'm going to have a code element with content JResults. Now let's give the pre-HTML elements a class, alert, then alert info, then some margin top as well. Okay. All right, now you're going to add the form to the web page, and that is what you're going to do in the next video. In this video, you are going to build an Express server and then build the post request, which will send a request to the OpenAI completion API to get a response that we're going to send back to the front end. So first of all, you're going to import all the modules you're going to need in the server.js file. So the modules we need are Express and the .env module to manipulate or manage the variables or the environment variables that we're going to put inside a file.env. Let's start by creating the .env file, which will be in the root directory of our project. And inside this file, I'm going to set up the different environment variables. So let's start with the port. So this is the port I'm going to use for the backend. So I'm going to go for port 500, and then the base URL for our project is going to be http://localhost 500. And then the other variable I'm going to need is OpenAI API key. And here you will need to paste your own API key. Again, make sure that you replace this with your own API key, otherwise it's not going to work. And the name of the file is .env instead of comma. All right. Now let's import the different modules. I'm going to start with the express module. So I'm going to define a variable express and require express. Then I'm going to import the .env module. And that's the module we're going to need to manage or get our environment variables from the .env file. And then I'm going to define a variable app, which I'm going to set to the output of the express function. And then we're going to need to accept JSON data in our requests. So to do this, we're going to go to the app objects and then use express.json. And after that, we're going to set up the environment variables so that we can retrieve them from the .env file. And to do that, you go to the .env or the .env object and use the config method. So this will configure the variables for us and we'll be able to retrieve them if needed. Now we're going to go to the OpenAI API configuration. So we're going first to require OpenAI and store a couple of elements inside variables. So the first variable is going to be the configuration, and the second one is going to be OpenAI API. And we're going to require the module OpenAI. Again, it's very important that you run npm install to install all the packages inside the package.json file, which you'll find in the resources attached to this video. Otherwise, you're going to have to install these modules manually every time you need one of them, which will be very time consuming. Okay, so now we've got the configuration variable and we've got the OpenAI API object. Now we can build an instance of the OpenAI API and store it inside a variable OpenAI. So we're going to use the constructor OpenAI API, and this constructor will take a parameter configuration, which I'm going to build using the configuration constructor. So let's build the configuration element using that constructor. So we're going to pass some parameters here, and we only need the API key, which we can get from process.env.OpenAI API key. And just make sure that this matches the one that you've got inside your environment variable. And it's a match. Okay. Now you are going to build a function called RunCompletion. This function is going to send a request to the OpenAI completion API and get a response from there. So the function is going to be an async function. And let's name it RunCompletion. It's going to take a prompt as the argument and then is going to send the request to OpenAI. So I'm going to store the response inside a variable response. And the request is going to be OpenAI.create completion. And then we're going to pass parameters to the create completion method inside an object. And then after that, we're going to return the response. So that's our function. All right, the first parameter I'm going to pass to the method is the model. And here we're going to use the text DaVinci 003 model. And then I'm going to pass the prompt, which is inside our prompt variable. And I'm going to pass also a max token parameter, which will be the maximum number of tokens we're going to use for our request, and that's the combination of the input tokens as well as the output tokens. So for now, let's go for 50 tokens. All right, so our request will not be able to exceed that number when we total the input tokens and the output tokens. And that's a very important parameter, as the more tokens you consume, the more you're going to be charged by OpenAI. Okay, so now we are ready to build our post request. So to build the post request, I'm going to go to the app variable, then post, followed by the root, which is going to be /API/chat GPT. And that's the root we used in the front end. And then I'm going to pass a function, which is going to be an async function, as we're going to be sending a request to the OpenAI, and we're going to be waiting for the request to be processed. So this function will take the request and response parameters, and then we'll run the following code. We're going to have a try and catch statement. And then inside the try statement, I'm going to run this code. And then inside the error statement, I'm going to handle the error. And after that, we're going to set the port and start the server on our chosen port. So first, we're going to extract the text from the request body. So to do that, I'm going to use the structuring. The variable I'm going to create is text. And I'm going to set that to request.body. And this will extract the text from there. Then I'm going to pass the request text to the RunCompletion function. So I'm going to store the output inside completion and run await RunCompletion, to which I'm going to pass text. And then after that, I'm going to return the completion as a JSON response to the front end. So to do that, result.json, and I'm going to send back an object with a property data set to completion.data. And then we're going to manipulate that later in the front end. All right, now let's handle the error in the catch statement. So I'm going to check if we've got a response inside the error object. And if that's the case, I'm going to console.error both error.response.status and error.response.data. Also, I'm going to send the status to the front end, which I can obtain using error.response.status, and JSON data, where I'm going to place error.response.data. Otherwise, I will console.error something like error with OpenAI API requests. And then after that, I'm going to show the error message, which is error.message. And then I will send to the server the status 500 and JSON data, which I'm going to set to an object made of an error property that I'm going to send or set to message set to something like an error occurred during your request. Okay, so Now let's set the port and store it inside a variable port, which I'm going to set to process.env.port. And if we don't have a port, I will just use the default value, which is 5000. And then after that, I'm going to start the server by going to the app object, then listen. Then I'm going to pass to that the port. And once the server starts, I'm going to console.log something like server started on port followed by the port number. Okay. Now let's try our code and make sure that everything works as expected. So I'm going to send this prompt and let's see what we've got in the console. So we've got an object there. So inside the object, we've got data, and inside data, we've got a choices array, and the first element of the choices array has got the sky is usually a pale blue color. So this is perfect. Our code works perfectly. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use that object to display the results and the JSON results. So let's go back to the front end. So here I'm just logging the data object. I'm going to set the prompt to the input value. And then I'm going to set the results to data.choices. And then I'm going to access the first elements of the choices array and then .text. And then I'm going to set the JSON results to data.data, but because we need to stringify it, I'm going to write JSON.stringify, then data.data. And I'm going to add some parameters, null and 2, just for formatting. Okay, and then I'm going to empty the input by setting the input value to an empty string. And then finally, I'm going to empty the error by setting it to an empty string as well. So now let's try our code again. And this time you can see the prompt and you can see the results, which we retrieved from the objects that we received back from the server. So the color of the sky varies depending on the time of the day, and that's something you're going to find right there. So we went to the data element .data, and inside it we went to the choices array, first element, and then we selected the text property, and that's how we retrieved that sentence. Now, if you check the finish reason, it says here stop, meaning that the model finished generating the text. Now, if I change the request parameters and set the maximum tokens to something really small, like 5 tokens, for example, and try again, you can see this time that the response has been cut off. So the model has not finished generating text, but it had to stop because we reached the maximum number of tokens allowed. So if you check the usage, you can see that the completion tokens are 5, and that's the maximum allowed as per our request. Our prompt tokens are 6 tokens, and the total is 11. But we couldn't exceed the maximum number of tokens for completion, and that's the one we specified using the max tokens property in the request. Congratulations for finishing the completion example. The code that you wrote for this example is very important, as you're going to use this as a template later on for other examples in the course. And that applies both to the front end and the back end. Now let's change the max tokens to something like 50, just to get complete answers. Alright, in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can manage your tokens expenditure and make sure you don't go over your budget. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can manage your tokens expenditure and also make sure you don't go over your budget. So if you log into platform.openai.com, then go to manage account, then press usage, you will get a graph like this. And this shows you your daily usage in USD. You can also see the cumulative usage if you like. And this also shows you your usage per month and the credits used. Now, if you go to billing, then go to usage limits, you can specify limits for your usage per month, and you're going to have a soft limit and a hard limit. If you reach the soft limit, then you're going to get an email from OpenAI to notify you that you reached that limit. If you reach the hard limit, then your requests are going to be rejected automatically after that. Now I'm going to introduce you to something called a tokenizer. The tokenizer can convert a piece of text into tokens, and you can use it to calculate the number of tokens in a piece of text. Let's check an example. I'm going to paste some text in there, and here it says that I've got 4 tokens in my text, and it gave each token a different color. Now, if you want to see the token IDs, you can just press there, and the output of the tokenizer is actually an array of tokens. So to get the number of tokens in your text, all you need to do is calculate the length of the array, which you can obtain using the length property of the array. This function is really important because sometimes you may want to calculate the number of tokens that you're going to send in the request before sending the request, just to make sure that you don't go over the budget limit. And you're going to see in the projects we're going to build in this course that this is very important, especially when you are sending large amounts of text to the API, especially if you are calculating things like embeddings, as we're going to do later in the books recommendations project. Now, I'm just going to give you a flavor of how this works. I'm going to import the encode and decode functions from the GPT-3 encoder, which is the encoder recommended by OpenAI for JavaScript. So, for example, I'm going to encode a piece of text. For example, this is some text. And let's console.log x. And you can see that we've got an array of tokens. Now, if you want to know how many tokens you've got in that piece of text, all you need to do is get the length of the array, like this. And that should give you 4. All right. You can also decode an array of elements into text. But for now, we are only interested in the encoder. Now, this is really important because if you know the number of tokens you've got in the input, then you can calculate how much those input tokens are going to cost you. All you need to do is multiply the length of the array with the cost per token. So, for example, if you are using GPT-4 32K context, the number of, or the cost per million tokens is $60. So that is 60 divided by 1 million. Now imagine that you've got some piece of text that contains 4,000 tokens and you want to calculate the cost. You're just going to multiply 4,000 by the cost per token. So 4,000 input tokens will cost you $0.24, which is 24 cents. Now, if you use another model instead of GPT-4 32K, like let's go for GPT 3.5 Turbo, the cost per million for inputs or input tokens is only $1.5. And you will end up paying less than 1 cent compared to 24 cents for GPT 4 32K. In this video, I'm going to give you a quick note about getting a key for GPT-4 API. Previously, you had to be put on a waiting list before getting access. But on July the 6th of this year, they gave access to all API users who have made a successful payment of $1 or more. And they are planning to open up access to new developers by the end of this month, which is July 2023. But you can still get access straight away to GCP4 on chat.openai.com if you upgrade to a Plus subscriber. But bear in mind that the current cap is very low, standing at 50 messages every 3 hours. Again, this information applies at the time of recording this video, which is the 27th of July 2023. And these details may change in the future.